equality and inclusiveness as the foundation of education. The college also boasts of one of the oldest law libraries in the country, which is also a proud owner of rare collections of literature, 49 computer machines with high-speed internet and access to e-legal resources, supplemented with the JAWS software and Braille printer for the differently abled. The canteen is an excellent spot to unwind and relax, where the students can enjoy homely and clean food at affordable prices. The college has taken concrete steps in order to make its environs accessible to people with different abilities. Care has been taken to ensure that the hostel is accessible to people with disabilities, with the help of ramps and other aids. This, along with the state-of-the-art sports facilities, allow for a multitude of sports like football, cricket, tennis, volleyball, and a swimming pool, which complement the rigorous work done in classrooms with physical fitness. Under the able guidance of the teaching and administrative staff, the college has established various cells in order to achieve its aim of social inclusiveness and justice for all. The legal aid cell, which is instrumental in providing free legal literacy, is the mainstay of this process. Working towards gender equality, inclusiveness, and social justice by upholding the rights of women, empathy towards the differently abled, and aiding the socially and economically disadvantaged sections of the society form some of our core social responsibilities. These responsibilities are institutionalized in the form of programs, activities, and initiatives taken up through various cells with the help of infrastructure provided to the students. One of the many initiatives taken by the ILS Law College is the Equal Opportunities Come Enabling Cell, headed by Dr. Sanjay Jain, who himself is a person with disability. No other institution in Pune has contributed as much towards the cause of inclusiveness and the change in attitude, incorporating the immortal words of Mahatma Gandhi. If you want to see a change, you have to be a part of it. The college has produced distinguished legal luminaries, which include 3 former Chief Justices of India, T.V. Gajendra Gadkar, Y.V. Chandrachud, and E.S. Venkataramaiah. While the students and teachers strive to achieve these lofty goals, the sister institutions of the ILS also play a role in helping realize this dream. Indian Law Society's Center for Arbitration and Mediation, Center for Mental Health Law and Policy, Center for Health Law and Policy C-HELP, Institute of Advanced Legal Studies.
That was a very brief video, friends, which our students had created to give an introduction of more than 95 years old institution. To introduce and begin with this summit, I have a quote from Leif Gregerson from Through the Withering Storms. The measure of a man or woman is not so much what they have accomplished, though that has weight. If it often is much more, though, what the man or woman has overcome to accomplish what they have. Ladies and gentlemen, this international summit will witness the experiences of the legal professionals from around the world who have accomplished their goals by overcoming hurdles and barriers posed by the society. To begin with, I request Dr. Sanjay Jain, Principal, ILS Law College, to introduce the summit and welcome the participants. Jain, sir, please.
Thank you very much, Swati. Let me first welcome Justice Sikri also. I also acknowledge our collaborators, Harvard University Project on Disability Rights, Center for Disability Studies, University of Leeds, and Oxford Hub of Human Rights. I also acknowledge our media partners, Bar and Bench and Radio Udan, which is a community radio run by the visually challenged people, blind people in India. I thank you, Danish, for for being part of this event. Now let me formally begin my short address. Honorable Professor Michael Stein, Professor Peter Blanck, Professor Dr. Paul Harpur, Professor Anna Lawson, my mentor Dr. Deshpande, Honorable our administration and Director Administration Academic Joshi Madam, all the honorable members of Governing Council and the general body members of Indian Law Society, students, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, it gives me an immense pleasure to welcome you all on this very historical occasion of the 3-day international summit of disabled legal professionals. And my heart really goes out for my friend Sandeep Bedi, who recently passed away with corona. In fact, around 4 or 5 years ago, over a cup of tea when we were sitting in my house, he told me, he conceived this idea with me, saying, Sanjay, why can't we have something like World Economic Forum? Why can't we have a summit of all the disabled legal professionals? Unfortunately, Sandeep is not with us today, but I would like to dedicate this summit to his memories. Now let me very briefly, because Rahul will talk more about the broad objectives of the summit, but let me highlight 3 important issues why we were interested to hold this summit. Firstly, the mantra which goes like nothing about us without us. But is it really practiced in reality? Are we really taken seriously? Whether we as persons with disability, whether our lived experiences are really reflected in the administration, whether be it the policy formation, be it execution of policy, or be it revision of policy, or be it enactment of laws, or taking up any programs, policies or initiatives. Have we ever consulted? Or whether we are mainly subjected to patronism, whether we are mainly subjected to patronage. Why most of the times we capture ourselves in binary, disabled versus non-disabled. So we thought that why not showcase the talent of people with disabilities? Why not showcase to the world the stars amongst us who are doing wonderfully well in different facets of law, be it Professor Stein, or be it Anna Lawson, or be it Dr. Harpur and others. So therefore, this was the first important reason why we thought that we should have a summit like this. Secondly, I also think that the present conception of law is by and large linear. We tend to take law unidirectionally. We tend to have its origin in a single document as such. But can a linear model of law, focusing on a single document or a single source, can it really do justice to diversity? Can it really do justice to a vulnerable group like people with disabilities? And therefore, we thought that let's promote a multilinear model of law. Let's argue that law cannot be confined to a single source. If you want to capture the lived experiences of groups like people with disabilities, then you have to abandon the singular focus on a particular document and advocate for the multi-source model of law. That was our second objective. Thirdly, Article 8 of UNCRPD is a revolutionary article, because this article clearly says that you have to raise awareness about the potential of persons with disabilities. And when it comes to potential of persons with disabilities in the field of law, I think there is enormous deficit. There are enormous misgivings. For example, recently, Supreme Court of India, in one of its judgments, which has to be immediately overruled, held that blind people are ineligible to be judges in law courts. So, what about showcasing the potentials of people with disability? What about raising the awareness about the productivity of people with disability in the mainstream? And therefore, we thought that let's go for this particular summit. Last but not the least, so far as today's summit is concerned, which is dedicated to disability academicians, I think Anna will enlighten us more. Paul, Peter, and even Professor Stein will also talk about it more. But what about evolving the disability legal studies, and what about providing this neglected domain of law a proud place in the legal curriculum, right? So I think that all these objectives will be fulfilled. We'll have very important inputs during the discussions from all the eminent panelists. By the way, I would also like to mention Sandra Friedman, the name of Professor Sandra Friedman, who is going to, of course, moderate the discussion post the opening remarks of all the panelists. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen, sir, for that really warm welcome and a precise welcome. I would now request Advocate Rahul Bajaj to share his introductory remarks. Rahul, over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Hi, everyone. Justice Sikri, all the panelists, Professor Jain, Professor Friedman, members of the Governing Council of ILS Pune, Professor Joshi, thank you so much for being here today and for letting me be a part of this summit. I thought in my brief remarks, I would talk to you a little bit about why it is that I thought this summit was important over and above what Professor Jain has already said and what I hope we will be able to extract from it. So, as a law student, and I should mention at the outset because it's relevant to what I'm going to say later on, that I am myself blind since birth. I am currently, I finished my legal education in 2017 and then pursued my postgraduate education for 2 years, and I'm currently clerking at the Supreme Court of India. So, when I was a law student 4 to 5 years ago and on the lookout for internships, and I reached out to many organizations, law firms, litigators, one common response that I got was that they did not know how concretely they could accommodate me. And they had several inhibitions, most of which were unfounded, about how I might be able to get the job done, such as whether I would be able to climb stairs or whether they had the appropriate support system that I needed without concretely asking me what support I needed and how much help I would need from them. And some I later realized even turned down my application on the basis that they did not have it in them to support my needs. And I developed the acute realization that while in the legal profession we often talk about diversity along various axes, and that is no doubt important, gender, in other countries, race, in India also a little bit about caste, but how far the disabled are meaningfully integrated in the legal profession isn't a topic that receives sustained attention at all. And therefore, it was my endeavor, it has been my endeavor since I joined the profession to do whatever little I can to help move the needle in the direction of changing that. And it is my hope that through this 3-day summit, we will be able to have a sustained dialogue, a well-considered and sustained dialogue on what we can do to attenuate some of the barriers that legal professionals with disabilities face. I realize that many of these barriers are far too deeply entrenched to go away merely by us having these conversations, but at least we will be able to make a significant step in the direction of addressing attitudinal, infrastructural, and other barriers that people in different facets of the legal profession with disabilities face. I should also mention that we will, on 3rd December, as part of the valedictory ceremony, be launching a book that we've put together featuring the interviews of 21 legal professionals with disabilities from 6 countries across 3 continents. And we will share a copy of that book with all our speakers, and it will be available for Kindle purchase starting 3rd December. And I would strongly recommend that you read that, because it will provide you a very detailed and concrete account of the kinds of challenges that legal professionals with disabilities face on an everyday basis, as also how they can meaningfully be overcome. And my hope is that we will be able to change, to get to a point where people, when they see someone with a disability, don't ask the rhetorical how in terms of expressing incredulity about how someone with a disability can do something, but the literal how in terms of being open-minded and genuinely trying to determine how a disabled person with the appropriate support can get the job done. So with that, I will conclude my remarks with the hope that we will have a productive discussion here today.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Rahul, for setting the tone for the summit. Before we begin with the panel discussion, I would just briefly like to introduce the galaxy of our panels today. To begin with, our keynote speaker, who has shared the video message with us, is Maria Soledad Cisternas Reyes. Maria is a special envoy of UNSG on disability and accessibility since 2017. She has a degree in law and master's in political science. She is a lawyer, law professor, and a researcher. She is a chairperson of the Committee on Rights of Persons with Disability of the United Nations between 2013 to 16, and she has received a National Human Rights Award, Chile, in 2014. Our first panel on day one, the panel for day one, constitutes of 6 experts on disability laws. The first speaker is Professor Michael Ashley Stein. Professor Michael is the co-founder and executive director of Harvard Law School Project on Disability and a visiting professor at Harvard Law School since 2005. Considered one of the world's leading experts on disability law and policy, Dr. Stein participated in the drafting of UNCRPD, works with disabled people's organization and NGOs around the world, he actively consults with the government on their disability laws and policies, advises a number of UN bodies and national human rights institutions, and has brought landmark disability rights litigation globally. Professor Stein has received numerous awards in recognition of his transformative work, including the inaugural Morton E. Ruderman Prize for Inclusion, the inaugural Henry Viscardi Achievement Award, and ABA Paul G. Hahn Award. His authoritative and path-breaking scholarship has been published worldwide by leading journals and academic presses, and has been supported by fellowships and awards from the American Council of Learned Societies, the National Endowment for Humanities, and the National Institute on Disability Rehabilitation and Research, among others. Dr. Stein holds an extraordinary professorship at University of Pretoria's Center for Human Rights. He is a visiting professor at the Free University Amsterdam and teaches at Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Welcome, Professor Stein. Second speaker of our panel is Professor Peter Blanck. Professor Peter Blanck is University Professor at Syracuse University, which is the highest faculty rank granted to 8 prior individuals in the history of university. He is the chairman of Burton Blatt at Syracuse University. Professor Blanck received a Juris Doctorate from Stanford University, where he was president of the Stanford Law Review, and a PhD in social psychology from Harvard University. Blanck's most recent book is Disability Law and Policy, published by Foundation Press in 2020, in honor of the 30th anniversary of Americans with Disabilities Act. On October 1st, 2020, Blanck became principal investigator of the new National Research and Rehabilitation Training Center on Disability Inclusive Employment Policy. Professor Blanck, in collaboration with the American Bar Association, is also leading a longitudinal study to help measurably enhance the professional lives of lawyers with disabilities and others in profession by understanding and mitigating pernicious sources of attitudinal stigma and structural biases. Welcome Professor Peter Blanck to this summit.
Thank you.
Our third speaker of our panel is our very own Professor Anna Lawson from School of Law, University of Leeds. Since 1990, she's professor over there. She's also a joint director of the university-wide interdisciplinary Center for Disability Studies and coordinator of the Law School's Disability Law Hub. Her academic interest in disability and law is rooted in her own experience of life as a disabled person. She's committed to working with disabled people, researchers with different disciplinary backgrounds, and other stakeholders to tackle the persistent forms of disadvantage and exclusion experienced by disabled people all over the world. She has held trustees and advisory position in a range of local, national, and international disabled peoples and human rights organizations. She regularly advises policymakers, governments, and intergovernmental organizations, has acted as an expert advisor on accessibility for the Council of Europe in connection with disability strategy between disability strategy 2017-23, and was a special advisor to House of Commons Women and Equalities Committee in connection with its inquiry into disability and the Built Environment 2016-17. She is also a member of Equality and Human Rights Commission's Disability Advisory Committee. Dr. Anna Lawson was awarded the International Bob Heppel Memorial Prize by the Equal Rights Trust and the Industrial Law Society in recognition of her contribution to disability equality. In 2017, she became an honorary Master of Bench at Middle Temple, and she is also adjunct member to the graduate program in critical disability studies at York University. Welcome, Professor Anna Lawson, back again to ILS Law College. Our next speaker for this panel is Dr. Paul Harpur, who is an associate professor with the University of Queensland Law School, chairs their disability inclusion group, and is a former Fulbright scholar and former Paralympian. He is an academic fellow with Harvard Law School Project on Disability, an international distinguished fellow with Burton Blatt Institute, Syracuse University, a non-executive director with Help Enterprises Limited, and guide dog user. Dr. Harpur was recognized to receive a 2019 citation for outstanding contribution to student learning as a part of Australian Award for University Teaching Program. Dr. Harpur's citation goes this way: for outstanding leadership in translating disability strategies into a vision of ability, equality, and core university business. He believes in ability, equality strongly, and works for a world where no longer talk about us and them, and instead just about us. Welcome, Dr. Paul.
And thank you very much for the honor of presenting today.
We also have Dr. Shirish Deshpande, who's Professor Maharashtra National Law University, Nagpur, India. Was HOD at Nagpur University, former. Welcome, Dr. Shirish Deshpande. Another panelist is our very own Dr. Sanjay Jain, who's additional principal in charge Law College. And sir has more than total of 20 years of experience. His interests include feminist jurisprudence, gender justice with special reference to Indian situation, comparative constitutionalism, sociological jurisprudence, disability right jurisprudence, human rights of marginalized groups. Sir has received a national award in employee category on the occasion of World Disabled Day in 2004. And sir has various books and research publications to his credit. I wouldn't welcome you, sir, because you're the host. And we have our moderator for this session, which is Professor Sandra Friedman, Professor of Law, Oxford University. She's the Director, Oxford University Rights Hub. Professor Sandra Friedman is a Rhodes Professor of Laws of the British Commonwealth and the USA at Oxford University. She was elected as a Fellow of the British Academy in 2005 and became Honoris Causa in 2012. She is Honorary Professor of Law at the University of Cape Town and a Fellow of Pembroke College, Oxford. She has written and published widely on anti-discrimination law, human rights law, and labor law, including numerous peer-reviewed articles and 3 monographs. She has also edited several books and co-authored and has written numerous articles in peer-reviewed law journals. She was awarded a 3-year Liverhume Majors Research Fellowship in 2004 to further her research in socioeconomic rights and substantive equality. She has acted as an expert advisor on equality law and labour legislation in European Union, Northern Ireland, the UK, India, South Africa, Canada, and the UN, and is a barrister practicing at Old Square Chambers. And she has founded Oxford Human Rights Hub in 2012, of which she is the director. Welcome, Dr. Sandra Friedman.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
So to begin with, I would hand over to you, Dr. Sandra. But we have, before that, a keynote video which is shared by Ms. Maria Soledad. Just give me a minute to share the video, and thereafter I'll hand over the panel to you for the moderation.
Dear colleagues, a fraternal greeting from South America. I thank the Indian Law Society, Law College, Pune, India, for the invitation to participate in this important international summit. I would like to tell you that with many years of work and research in this area of disability, I can say that universal accessibility is, in my opinion,
It's not coming through clearly.
transversal figure in human rights during the 21st century. Universal accessibility involves physical spaces, information, communications, technology, goods, services, products, procedures, both in facilities open to the public or for public use, in urban and rural spaces. Accessibility is universal because it has to do with persons with disabilities, but much further towards older persons, towards mothers who go with their children in their arms or in baby carriage, to people who have had an accident in their ears, in their vision, and that for a temporary reason they will be limited in this sense. On the other hand, accessibility is a pillar and bridge for the exercise of other human rights such as education, work, or health. And it is also a key factor for the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals according to the 2030 Agenda. For example, inclusive production, peaceful and just societies, and effective institutions that work. As you know, accessibility is enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, in a specific article on the matter. It is also a principle, a guiding principle of the Convention, and it is found in the aspect of access to information and communications regarding freedom of expression and information, opinion, and access to communication. In this last case, it makes us see the importance, for example, of sign language as a natural form and expression of the cultural and linguistic identity of deaf persons, an accessible format such as Braille or audio description for blind persons, augmentative or alternative communication formats such as easy
So whatever is spoken gets transcribed.
text for persons with intellectual disabilities, among others.
Turn on captions.
Even the convention itself assigns
Excuse me, there is a slight lag in how this is coming. Can you fix that?
information. I would like to say that in a recent document that I prepared for UNESCO, I point out that access to information and communications is so vital to democracy that the lack of this form of accessibility would bring us within the scope of the Convention Against Corruption, which is one that reflects the figure of transparency. Therefore, This aspect of accessibility is relevant for millions of people in the world, as is accessibility to physical space or transportation. From this point of view, I would like to tell you that I worked for 4 years as chair of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and in the review of the initial reports of all the states parties that we consider in that period, in both developed and developing countries, there were always recommendations regarding universal accessibility. This accessibility has been said to be the backbone of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And notice how important this legal concept has been, that the committee prepared a general comment on universal accessibility, noting that it had a part that supported the fulfillment of civil and political rights, and another part that supported the fulfillment of economic, social, and cultural rights, and whose implementation should be gradual but constant. And this is very important to keep in mind. Gradual but constant. We also have to point out that this accessibility is related to access to justice for persons with disabilities. Article 13, which tells us that states parties shall ensure effective access to justice for persons with disabilities on an equal basis with others, including through the provision of procedural and age-appropriate accommodations, in order to facilitate their effective role. Not the nominal role, the effective role of persons with disabilities in the different legal proceedings, and whatever the capacity of their participation, including as witnesses in investigative and preliminary stages. Therefore, accessibility is a basic condition of access to justice, and so much so that a couple of months ago, the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and who speaks to you, a Special Envoy of the Secretary General on Disability and Accessibility, we released the International Principles and Guidelines on Access to Justice for Persons with Disabilities, which contains 10 areas, one of which is accessibility. And it is concerned to point out that accessibility for access to justice must be based on universal design in such a way that courts, police stations, prisons, all of them must be fully accessible, both in lounges and offices, in lifts, in corridors, etc. This accessibility must also refer to information and communications within the administration of justice, to the transportation used to reach the courts or other centers related to the administration of justice. And there must be specific resources designed for the judiciary so that it can make all justice facilities more accessible every day. It is also important to consider the training of those who work in the administration of justice, as well as police officers and prison staff, in regards to the rights of persons with disabilities, and of course to universal accessibility. This is also an accessibility condition. And having said that, I want to tell you that now, shortly, I am going to issue a document called 10 Fields of Action for an Inclusive Quality Police Service, and that it is intended, as the name says, to the police. One of these 10 areas of action is precisely accessibility in all police spaces, including the transportation used by the police and, of course, access to information and communication. I would like to tell you that all documents that I have mentioned are on the internet, and I will communicate to the organizers the links where you can find them. I would like to conclude this presentation with 2 remarks. The first is that accessibility is strongly related to Sustainable Development Goal number 11, which refers to achieving inclusive cities and human settlements, and refers in particular to public spaces and transport. but also when the Sustainable Development Goal number 16 refers to access to justice. And why do I say this? Because this has to do with the importance of accountability before the high-level political forum that reviews sustainable development, just as the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities reviews the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And the second aspect with which I would like to conclude is that of jurisprudence. Much has been discussed whether accessibility is a right, and I think it is, because that is what the jurisprudence indicates. There are judgments in various courts, and the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has also expressly pointed out this when a person with disabilities was prohibited from using a digital device to mark his vote. The lack of accessibility was punished in this case. With this, then I hope I have contributed to this wonderful activity. Thank you very much.
My apologies for technical glitches. Some parts of the videos could not be heard, but we'll put it on the blog of the event. We have the full video.
Yes, sir. Yes. So it is internet connectivity. From our side, it was visible, but then if you had an internet problem, maybe because of that. So we'll be
Voice
definitely
problem
sharing.
Yeah,
Yes,
audio
yes,
problem.
yes. So with that, I hand over to Professor Sandra Friedman. Professor Sandra, would you like me to call the panelists, or you would call them?
Hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be here, and many congratulations to Professor Sanjay Jain for organizing this, and to Rahul. I'm very, very glad to be part of this panel of people from all over the world. I would be very grateful, yes, if you could introduce the speakers, because it would help if you could do the timekeeping. Can I remind everybody that I think you're allocated 10 minutes, and we're very much looking forward to hearing your thoughts. And afterwards, I'll come back in and we can have a discussion based on your presentations. But yes, if you could if you could just present the speakers so that you can manage the timekeeping, that would be wonderful.
Yes, sure, Professor Sandra. We would do that. We would keep the time.
She wants you to invite each of them. She was not there
Yes.
when we...
Yes. May I request Professor Michael Ashley Stein to address?
Thank you, and thank you to my friends at the ILS for allowing the Harvard Law School Project on Disability to partner with you. Congratulations to my friends, Dr. Sanjay and Dr. Sumitra and Madam Yoshi. It's been a long time since we've seen each other. I very much enjoyed our visit together a few years ago when we also had the pleasure of Justice Yacob, which was marvelous. So all of 27 years of teaching in 10 minutes, and what I've learned as an academic with a disability. All right. The short version is that things have gotten better, at least as far as the US is concerned, and outside the US there are exciting prospects, but that in both places there's still a lot to be done. For myself, since Sanjay Da asked me to speak from my own perspectives, when I first went to law school, which was Harvard Law School, the same place I'm speaking to you from now, there was no access. And there was, of course, no Americans with Disabilities Act and no CRPD. And so classrooms were inaccessible. Access to those classrooms underground was not accessible. There were no accessible restroom facilities or eating facilities or learning facilities, including the library. All that has changed, of course, and things have gone for the better. As an academic with a disability, I also became the first person with one to have been a member of the Harvard Law Review. my year was the year in which Michelle Obama was my classmate. And 2 years later, a certain person named Obama became president of the Law Review. So now I have many students with disabilities who are on the Law Review. And I've spent some time this year working with the Law Review on making their write-on exam accessible, so that finally persons who are visually impaired can have an equal shot at making the Law Review. As far as teaching is concerned, it's been 3 decades. And when I began teaching, there were only a very small number of people with disabilities out of, say, 2,000 or so American law professors. We only had a few who had disabilities, and we only had a few who would teach in the area of disability law. I'd like to say that they were encouraging and supporting and mentoring as far as my entering the legal academy, but the truth is that the lovely person you'll hear from in a moment, Peter Blanck, to whom I'm eternally grateful for his friendship and support, was the only person with anything to do with disability law who encouraged me to teach or to be a member of the academy, who made efforts to say, I'd like you to be a member of the academy, I'd like to have you as a colleague. Otherwise, I was largely ignored, and my mentors were always persons of color and women, people who understood what it was like not to have been included in the academy, what it was like to break the barriers, what it was like to look different, to teach different, and so on. I will confess to you that I found it much less discriminatory and much easier to be a practicing lawyer for the 5 years that I did it than entry into the legal academy. Despite anti-discrimination laws, I was asked questions in interviews such as, well, you're interviewing here in the Midwest, in Wisconsin, what is a person in a wheelchair going to do in the snow? My referees were asked questions like, how is he going to be able to teach a large class? Whereas I had been teaching at New York University and Stanford Law School, 2 of the top 5 within the US, and had among the best teaching evaluations at both those institutions, and so on and so forth. Greater questions than that. In the year 2000, when I entered as a tenure-track law professor, was the first year that we saw any law school in the US actually include disability in their advertisements for faculty as one of their diversity criteria that they desired. First time in the year 2000. It wasn't until about the year 2003 that disability was included among the diversity numbers and groups within the American Association of Law Schools. So these things have come about gradually and have improved. Now we have, I would say, probably over 100, 150 people with disabilities and without disabilities who are teaching something in the area of disability law. It's become much more popular in the law journals and in other publications. It is still not the criteria that will get you hired. You still need to teach contracts or torts or another large first-year, common law subject. But things have improved dramatically in that respect. Outside the U.S., we've also seen amazing accomplishments since the CRPD. I'm very proud of my students who have come through Harvard and have gone elsewhere and who have had the chance to interact with. The first course on disability law in Korea is taught by Jae-won Kim, who's now the vice dean at Sungkyunh Kwan University. First course on disability law in Pakistan, taught by Dr. Marva Khan, another one of my at Lums, another one of our graduates. First disability law clinic in China is a joint venture between Harvard and between Renda, and our graduate Gu Roy is teaching it. So I'm very proud of the way that disability law is disseminated. With another of my hats, I'm extraordinary professor at Pretoria, which is at the hub of the African Disability Law Network, which is linking together like a beautiful necklace across parts of Africa. New disability law clinics, disability rights courses, conferences, writings, and publications. I try as much as possible to mentor students with disabilities and those interested in disability law. I have a number of PhD students through my association with Free University, including some who have come through ILS in Pune, which I'm very happy to have had, and many across the African continent. When permitted, I'm always happy to mentor or to interact with others. I had a wonderful day a few years back with Professor Lawson at Leeds, where I spent a day of office hours with the PhD students and master's students coming through and discussing their work, and the same for when there was a Marie Curie grant across Europe of students with disabilities interested in disability law. I'm always happy to do that. So the prospects are looking better. They've increased. I think Professor Lawson might mention the new Disability and Social Justice Journal, which is going to be more intersectional and think broadly. Since Professor Fredman is moderating, I should mention that one of my former students is the co-founder of the Oxford Disability Law and Policy Center, and we're very proud of that as well. So things have improved. People with disabilities and disability law as a subject are taken more seriously, but we have a long way to go. Disability is still frequently ghettoized. It's still frequently segregated. It is difficult to see and untypical to see a person with a disability at a conference on commercial law or a conference on international law, sitting there providing their perspective either on disability law or on not disability law, just as far as being mainstreamed and being visible and being included. So we have a long way to go. I also recognize that anything that I have to say about the development of disability law in the US and some of its failings and some of its challenges is that I'm extraordinarily lucky and I'm extraordinarily privileged to be speaking from a developed context, an extremely wealthy context with all the resources that exist. To put it all into context and to give you an idea, in 1985, when I went to Harvard Law School and interviewed and was told that none of this accessibility would exist, and I said that it wasn't very welcoming or accommodating, I was told that if I didn't like it, I could, four-letter word we never use at Harvard, I could go to Yale. 15 years later, when I returned and I was teaching disability law, and I described these things to my students who had grown up with national level disability laws, national level access to education laws, they looked at me as if I was crazy. And that's beautiful. That's beautiful because in 15 years, we've had this complete culture change from, well, how can you possibly have a law professor or a law student with a disability to how could you possibly not have it, and why would you think that is strange? So that's been a wonderful culture shift. In the prompts that Dr. Sanjay gave me, I guess one thing I should mention is, he asked, have I experienced prejudice? I mentioned in the hiring process. I am in disability, I guess, what my predecessors, sisters, and brothers are in other contexts, and that is I've always overproduced. The only accommodation I've ever received in teaching has been to be in an accessible classroom, although there are times I've had to make classrooms accessible by being bounced up and down stairs. Peter can correct me, but we would say probably a productive top-level law professor might produce 40 or 50 pieces of scholarship across her career. I'm already well above 200. So I've always done the perspective of needing to overcompensate, being more interested in things, having to overproduce. And yet, of course, there still remain lots of challenges, such as Professor Fredman rightly received a Leverhulme and did a marvelous job. I love your book, Sandy, that came out of that. But I will recall that when I was nominated for it about a decade ago, the then dean at the Oxford faculty declined the request on the basis that no one would be interested in disability law. It wasn't an area which would be of interest to others. And just to be fair-handed, because my PhD is from Cambridge, the then chair of the law faculty at Cambridge, who was allegedly a human rights lawyer, said the same thing. So we have a way to go as far as being accepted. We've made tremendous, tremendous accomplishments. The people who are writing now in their 30s and 40s, the young guard, are marvelous. I mean, they're absolutely marvelous in generating wonderful projects and there's this real sense of community and real sense of collegiality on the international level for it. So I'm very happy about what we have to see in the future. So thank you very much for having me. I'll try to keep us on time by stopping now, and it's a pleasure to join you.
Thank you, Professor Stein. May I request Professor Peter Blanck to address the gathering?
Thank you. I hope you can hear me well. It's a great honor and pleasure to be with you all, with friends and new colleagues. I will oscillate between the very macro and the very micro and try to suggest to you several years of research and data and new projects that may be helpful in the topic of what lawyers are facing at this present time, lawyers with intersectional background, with multiple minority identities. We, of course, have the huge issue in the room now of COVID-19, particularly in the United States and elsewhere. And what we will view as work going forward, even in the law profession, is very much a work in progress. Just September 1st of this year, I was fortunate with my colleagues at Harvard and Rutgers University to receive funding to start a new national center funded by the Department of Health and Human Services to focus on what employment is going to look like during and post-COVID. One of those projects now is, I believe, among the largest, if not the largest, longitudinal survey of lawyers, American lawyers, looking at issues of disability, intersectionality, LGBTQ identification, race, gender, age, and as in part funded by the American Bar Association, began in 2019 prior to the onset of COVID. So we actually have kind of a natural experiment, given our next wave is going out in the spring of surveys post-COVID. We surveyed about 3,500 lawyers who responded. We surveyed about 200,000 lawyers across the United States. But the complete responses that were usable are about 3,500 from every state in the United States and the District of Columbia, from law firms of all sizes, from public and private entities, from judges, from academics, from in-house counsel to leading counsel from all over the country. Our survey was designed in collaboration with a blue ribbon panel of about 50 leading lawyers with disabilities and from the LGBTQ community around the United States. What happened essentially was the American Bar Association was particularly interested in what is called implicit or unconscious bias, which is of course very popular now. There are some methodological issues with how it's been measured. And they had conducted a number of large studies on the basis of race and gender. They wanted to push out and understand not only the nature of implicit bias facing lawyers with disabilities and those who identify as LGB. And I, of course, in a pretentious way said, implicit bias, what about explicit bias? Let's take a look at the whole gamut. So long story short, after about 6 months to a year of development, we rolled out this survey. And I'll tell you a little bit about the results in the brief time that I have. We are on our 4th paper now. I believe the conference organizers have made the papers available to you. The first paper was a descriptive analysis, which was based on remarks I gave at the University of District Columbia Law Review at one of their meetings. The second paper just focuses on the issue of workplace accommodations with some fairly counterintuitive findings. The third paper is going to be the subject of a special issue of the American Journal of Law and Medicine with leading commentators from across the communities who have submitted comments and who will be discussing the implications of the study. And the paper in Works now has to do with issues of disclosure and stigma and bias sort of coming out as a person with a disability and a person from multiple minority communities. I should also say the obvious, that we try to take a very non-monochromatic view of disability, LGBTQ, and other multiple social and personal identities. To say that all disabilities are monochromatic, of course, is incorrect and does a great disservice. We have in our survey looked at in great depth the nature of disability, the reporting of disability, the nature of self-identification, the nature of self-disclosure, the nature of perceptions of the workplace and organizational culture in the workplace. Now, we oversample lawyers with disabilities and lawyers from the LGBTQ community, in part because there are no data of this kind, and we wanted to get as broad a representation as we could. About 25% of our sample identified as lawyers having a disability or health condition or some other related impairment. About 16%, which is much higher, identified as LGBTQ. I should say, by the way, that in the legal profession, for example, in the United States, there's less than 1% of lawyers who self-identify as having disabilities, and we could talk about the reasons for that. So we oversampled. However, we have a very strong representative cross-section, in my view, on the basis of race, gender, age, ethnicity, and other characteristics, which comport with other national labor statistics. So they are fairly representative in that regard. From a very sweeping perspective, we find strong, high reports of discrimination, particularly subtle discrimination, not overt, faced by lawyers with disabilities and in the LGBTQ community. It is particularly of the most subtle kind that is recounted in very disturbing ways by many of these lawyers, and not of the overt kind. Interestingly, in the context of workplace accommodations, and again, I apologize, in about 10 minutes I'm telling you hundreds of pages of writing, so please refer to those articles if you would like. We studied, for example, in-depth workplace accommodations on the basis of disability. And you might expect that lawyers in this day and age would receive workplace accommodations, particularly in the legal context, where these lawyers, presumably, many of them were aware of legal rights and human rights and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Well, counterintuitively, we find, for example, generally across all the types of accommodations, that as expected, based in these regression analyses, these fancy multivariate analyses, which are intuitively based, that people with multiple minority identities, particularly disabled, particularly with mental health disabilities, particularly from the LGBT community, request high numbers of accommodations as compared to like individuals, white males without disabilities, women without disabilities, and so forth. And somewhat surprisingly, perhaps not to the folks on this phone, at least to us as researchers, we found that although their requests were at the highest prevalence levels, in fact, those individuals most often receiving workplace accommodations were white, non-disabled males who were older, with economic power in the firms. And among the least likely individuals to receive workplace accommodations across all ages and types of firms were lawyers with disabilities, lawyers in the LGBT community, and women. So, of course, we have to think about that quite hard. We are going to look at, as I say, in our second wave survey, we're going to drill down a lot deeper into some of these findings, these counterintuitive findings, high levels of reported discrimination, high levels of non-granting of workplace accommodations, and the particular nature of the discrimination that was faced by these individuals as well. Now, what are we learning? Big picture, I'll say a few comments about that, and then I will end. I'm not keeping close track of my time, so please cut me off if I exceed the time. Well, clearly, the game changer in the United States has been COVID-19 from a work task, work group, and work design approach. There was just a comment that popped up on the screen, where can we get your papers? And the organizers of this session have the published papers, I believe, and have submitted them on the blogs. I'm delighted to send them to you if you don't have them. The first one was in a law review. The others are in peer-reviewed journals of very high caliber, and my co-authors are from very diverse communities as well, who come from this with particular vantage points. I have shared the papers, yes, on the summit. A comment came up for those who can't see it. So the questions we are asking going forward is, why such high prevalence still? Why, when in the United States at least, there have been literally tens, hundreds of millions of dollars spent on diversity and inclusion in the legal profession? President Obama, to his credit, trained about 30,000 U.S. Department of Justice lawyers on implicit bias, but the needle is not moving. The needle is not moving for lawyers with disabilities, either at the entry level and sustaining in the legal profession, or attaining leadership positions in the firm. The same is true, but less so, for LGB lawyers, and the same is less true for women lawyers. For example, perhaps the largest sea change we've seen in the United States in the last 25 years is greater gender equality in the legal profession. However, studies show that women lawyers are leaving at much higher numbers the profession than men, and still the economic power in the legal profession in the United States is concentrated in white males, basically. Changes are occurring in terms of client awareness. Changes are occurring in terms of community and client expectations. And changes are occurring in the nature of work. For example, when I have 1 minute to conclude. When I first started this study, remote work was kind of the oddity. Now, all lawyers basically are working remotely. So we will see great changes going forward in this area. I'm delighted to discuss in much, much greater detail the nature of the studies. The second wave survey is going out in the spring, and our new center, our new national center, is taking a particularly close look at these issues from an intersectional perspective and a fluid perspective. That is, all of this is influenced by context, time, organizational culture, and other variables external to the individual as well that interact with personal identities. So I will stop there just to be on time. And as the good lawyers on the firm, the barristers and others know, for those of us that litigate, I've just begun to clear my throat in 10 minutes, but I will stop there. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Peter Blanck, for sharing those crisp findings of yours from your research. May I request Professor Anna Lawson to take over?
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to be with you all today. It's a great privilege to be here and sharing this panel with such good friends and esteemed colleagues. So Sanjay has given me some prompts to structure my contribution around, which I'll just get to them, sorry, which are really interesting. Thank you, Sanjay, because they give me an opportunity to reflect back at quite a personal level on my journey as a blind academic over the past embarrassingly long time. I think it was mentioned in my introduction that I started in 1990, which actually was quite a different era. And I think Michael has captured some of that in his talk. So So the first point Sanjay mentioned was to talk about how I'd addressed concerns about my capacity to manage and teach large batches of students. And I think the main concern about this, actually, that I've had to address was concerns that have come from myself rather than the concerns that have come from others. And so when I started teaching in 1990, I had a compulsory course to teach. I had property law, where there were about 200 students in a class. And I was extremely nervous. I could see a little bit, but not very much. I didn't use a cane or a guide dog at that point, but I probably should have done. I lost my sight progressively. And I could just about see enough to read some very large print words, but reading lecture notes was very stressful. So I found the whole experience of lecturing very stressful and difficult at that time. And I think it was about 3 lectures in. At the end of that lecture, some of the really conscientious students who sat at the front row, mature students, told me after the class that they were getting distracted because some of the other students were throwing paper aeroplanes in the back of the room. And I wasn't aware of it because I couldn't see this going on, so I wasn't picking it up during the class. So I thought about this and I got more and more angry, partly because they were taking advantage of the other students and distracting the other students. And I have found that very motivating and very empowering, not just challenging things that are going on that are unfair for me, but that are creating unfairness for others. So in the next lecture, I was able to say that I'd found out what was going on, and I was very disappointed about it because lectures weren't compulsory. They didn't need to come. They could play paper aeroplanes in the park. They were distracting the other students, and it was also taking advantage of the fact that I couldn't see. And actually, I was on that occasion, one of the other students in the class who happened to be a professional rugby league player, rugby league is very big in Yorkshire, came up to me at the end of the class and said, "You never need to worry about that again, because I've told them I'll smash their heads in if they ever do it again." Which was slightly an aggressive approach, but it made me chuckle. And I think it also gave me a reason to think, actually, it's no good trying to disguise the fact that I can't see or just get by and hoping people won't notice. I really need to be very honest and open with the students about the fact that I can't see and the impact that has on my teaching, and to ask them for their cooperation. And that's actually been a huge, it's confidence giving, but it's also worked really well. The students have been incredibly respectful and positive about that, and seem to, respond to it really well. So that's worked. So the next challenge, accessing and producing academic content. So obviously, as a blind person, accessing printed material is very difficult. And certainly in 1990, nearly all the material I needed to read was in print. At that point, computers were only just beginning to take hold, and so my main means of reading then was by audio tape, cassette tape. And obviously I had to wait. There was quite a long delay while somebody taped the books. Tapes would break. It was quite hard work, and it required a lot of organisation. So I chose the university I studied at, and then that I returned to as an academic, because it had a transcription centre where there were 2 paid organisers who took on the burden of all that time-consuming task of organising volunteers to put things onto tape. And that's still going, that transcription centre in Leeds. It was started by some blind academics in the 1980s. And it's still going, but it's been flexible about the outputs it produces. So it's moved now away from audio cassette. Nobody really wants audio cassette anymore. So now its main work is making things accessible in electronic format and large print. And the other type of support I was able to access was one that came from the government. We call it our Access to Work scheme, and that's a grant that is paid to disabled employees directly to cover the costs, extra disability-related costs associated with work. And we've got this assumption in the UK that's traditionally been quite generous, that funding. So I've used it to pay for a personal assistant, and I did that from my early years at work. And the assistant has read things to me live, supported with materials that are not accessible in other ways, but also been able to help with tasks like referencing, where actually working out whether, what format a reference is in, is there italics in the right place? Have things gone a bit wild and there's underlining everywhere where there shouldn't be? It's very helpful to have a sighted person to do that. So computers have made life an awful lot easier for me and for many other blind people as well. Being able to read so many documents that are in electronic format is much quicker than having to wait for them to be in tape, and it's safer. The problems haven't all gone away. There is still quite a lot of inaccessible content out there. And also just setting up computers in a way, because we're so dependent on them. I've currently got a new machine which is having teething troubles, and it can be, you realise how lost you are without your computer. I'm sure that's the case for everybody, but actually if you can't read without it, it makes life very difficult. And this move to online teaching, online meetings, in some ways has had advantages, but there are also accessibility related challenges around some of those too. Then the next challenge was to think about challenges that have come with discharging the administrative duties associated with the job. And I think with this one, one of the things, I've been very lucky to have supportive managers over my career, and one of the points about administrative duties is that not all of them may be ones that everybody needs to do. So I tried to do some invigilation duties early on because we were all expected to in those days. That was really extremely difficult, and I had to virtually delegate it all to my assistant. So there was just no point me doing that. So there's been some flexibility about which ones I do. And I think we all have some choices about which ones we take on. I've chosen ones that interest me, which tend to be ones that relate to increasing equality and inclusion. And yes, I think, again, being open about what adjustments you need, which can sometimes be challenging in itself, but that's really important. And if I don't do that, I feel like I really have myself to blame. And yes, I think just on the point about working on disability inclusiveness, so that's the end of the prompts that Sanjay gave me. But I want to take that a little bit further, that point about choosing to work on issues relating to equality and inclusion. So I did that with my own career. So my research and teaching originally focused on property law for 10 years. And then I managed to shift over towards disability and equality, which was fantastic because it was really, I was much more interested in that area than I was in property law, interesting though property law can sometimes be. And I think one of the things I've been I feel we still need to do more of is look at disability inclusiveness as well as other types of inclusiveness, and there's a lot of focus on race at the moment in the curriculum. And Michael and Peter have talked quite a lot about disability law and the way it's more and more prevalent, it's being taught more and more, but there's still very little of it when compared with many other subjects. And it's still got quite a low profile in many textbooks on other areas of law, even human rights core textbooks, and things like medical law, where you'd expect disability to feature quite highly. There's often very little from a disability critique. Yes, I'll stop there. That's my 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Professor Lawson, for sharing your experiences and keeping your time. May I request Dr. Paul Harpur to address the gathering?
Okay, madam, one small correction before Paul will take. The groundswork essentially conceptualized by Rahul and only merely brushed by me. So a lot of credit should be given to Rahul for those prompts. Thank you. You can take.
Okay, is that me now?
Yes, Dr. Paul.
Sorry, just got there. Okay. Well, thank you to my new friends at the ILS. It's a great honour to be here, have the opportunity to present tonight. And I really applaud your initiative. It's great. I think it's major. It's going to make significant changes. For me, I feel honoured, really honoured to be here tonight with many of my. I'm amazed. I've got an inspirational group, Michael Stein, who I visited back in 2008, who started a very big change. Work with Peter and continue to work with both Michael and, of course, who, being blind as well, I've reached out to a number of occasions and has provided me valuable mentoring, especially as a junior academic who as well was very scared asking those questions and how do I cope? And those, so I'm the younger, 40 now, he calls me a dinosaur, but I've truly built on the shoulders of the, so the fact I'm zooming now to India from my increasingly sweltering office in Brisbane, which is, it's a real honour. So, I mean, India itself, I think of India, had a long commitment to international disability. I mean, when the CRP started, India, in the first ad hoc committee, India was the best represented country in terms of it had a significant amount of deep disability person organisations, as well, of course, the state of India. And when the CRPD was adopted, India quickly ratified it in March of 2007, and India has submitted its initial report and received concluding observations. So if you read the first part up front where it's positive, talks about positive, you see some adoption of legislation and the ratification of Marrakesh, and as a blind person, the Marrakesh Treaty is something which has excited me and I've written on quite extensively. And then I scroll down to Article 27 and at paragraph 56, and I see what I was expecting, which is only 37% of people with disabilities in India have access to employment, and only 1.8% of women. So, they're pretty bad statistics. Australia has been there in the past. Now, but clearly India has a long history of recognising, and there's a normative shift. So, while you haven't ratified, the optional protocol hasn't been ratified, so there's no capacity to take a matter using the CRPD internationally. So how can we use this in our personal advocacy? Well, what we can do is take the breach of the CRPD into the media, to the courts, into courts, not as an action, but as talking about it, so it gets met. This is what? one of the things I want to talk more, I had some other notes, but since we're talking more about personal reflections, I'll flip over. And I really asked myself when preparing, what has made the biggest difference in my life as a legal academic? So that was, for me, what has made the biggest, and for me, it's the change in the way in which my university, and indeed other universities I've worked at, have treated me as a person with a disability. So one challenge I confronted, and I'm sure others have, the erroneous view by many in the community is that it's not their fault that a barrier exists. It's not their fault. So I hear this again and again. It's not my fault that the building has no lift. It's got stairs. It's not my fault that, yes, the lecture space is perfect for for students, but we don't ever anticipate someone getting a person with a disability flipping and standing behind the podium. I mean, a lecturer with a disability never heard. So it's not my fault that the podium software doesn't work. That's the person that procured its fault. It's not the ITS's fault. It's not the aviation support fault. So all these issues, I ask, well, whose fault is it? And yeah, there's a lot of people. Or the other way I've gone about it where I work is, well, flip it. Who can do something about that? So where is the point, or where's the touch point? Well, who can actually make it? And then after identifying those people, how do I motivate? Now, disability strategic litigation is really important. So, and if you want to read some good work, Michael has published a couple of pieces on cause lawyers, which is quite good. So it's really important. In my discrimination, copyright, equality book, I talked about how students have sued their universities, and through suing them, reached settlements which required them, universities, not to use the inaccessible Kindle, but instead use the more accessible iPhone. Of course, after a number of universities stopped using the inaccessible platform, that Amazon decided to quickly make itself more accessible, or it might be squeezed out of the whole market. So in that way, strategic litigation was powerful. Of course, if you're working for your employer, just putting it out there, suing your employer is not a good career move. The Dean of Law is not going to want to promote you after you've sued him or her. So it's very important, but for a university professor, or in my case, associate professor, it's not it's of limit. So what I've tried to do when I started, particularly at UQ, where I'm at now, and back in 2011, there was a lot of shortcomings, a lot of things that really bugged me. PowerPoints, there was no one to help with PowerPoints. There's a string of small things, nothing that was actionable. Nothing that I was going to take action. And of course, if I did, that wouldn't have helped me get tested. So what I really wanted to do is just create, first, let's try a soft approach. Let's create a voice on campus of people with disabilities, because I couldn't find anyone else with a disability. Even now they're hard to find, and I'm in a much better spot, and people are still hard to find. But anyway, so I had this idea, and I went across, I figured I had nothing to lose. I was asking to create a group to natter essentially about disability issues and bring it to the attention of people in power. Well, I went across to the Vice Chancellor's office, his secretary, because I didn't know where else to go because everybody else seemed to be, it's not my problem. And I wanted it across the university. And I was sent down to Workplace Diversity and Inclusion, who at the time were redrafting their disability action plan. And they said, that's a good idea, let's write it in as a group. And then Professor Tim Dunn, who Michael's met, and he's been a great champion of disability inclusion, said, well, if you're going to have a group, you really should be have some power. And so he gave the group power, gave us access, required people to write reports to us, and started a journey which has now, and that's a long ways. But so one of the models it's not really, I'd read some leadership material at this point, and I developed in a framework which isn't, I won't say a leadership person will pick it up and go, wow, but practically it was helpful. So I'll share it. It's just, it's not just a simple thing. It's a simple thing. Yes. So I used this group. It had key representatives from across the university, and I did answer through to the Pro Vice Chancellor. So I went around trying to spend, enormous amounts of time trying to find by asking people, putting out emails, surveys, who was doing good things, and then going around and just getting recognition, and by sending their name across the desk of the Pro Vice Chancellor, it was a small thing, but it made people feel that they were recognised. Well, they were recognised because often they'd get an email from the Chancellor saying, well done, that we really appreciate your work on this. Now, it wasn't anything formal, but that really motivated people. Now, I was the first person with a disability doing anything like so that those emails and that support really meant a lot and got a long way. Of course, that's only really rewarding those that are doing good. It doesn't motivate others or make systematic change. So the other thing I tried, the E of yes, is easy. Make it easy to be inclusive. Now, universal design, it's obvious, right? We all talk about it. Well, I tried to find ways to implement that where I could. I can't say I got a long way, but one aspect we did was in the library, they wanted to buy ebooks that are accessible, and I wrote a book on ebooks. So since I wrote a book on ebooks, they thought I should talk about ebooks, and that provided a really neat way for the library people who are interested in this topic to then say, look, there's this need. Here's Paul telling us it's needed. It's got the support of the Chancellery. Why don't we do something about this? So they got library research money to then look at how to purchase more accessibly. Now, part of that process was talk to the publishers who got interested in the accessibility very quickly because one of their clients who was giving them enormous amounts of money became interested. And so there was actually this flow-on effect where it became easy to actually purchase accessible ebooks, and more books purchased that were ebooks. And that made it much easier for me, and many more books in our library are actually available digitally and remotely. Now, when COVID hit and there was a shutdown, that had a significant benefit to everyone because suddenly it wasn't just people with disabilities who wanted to access books without going to the library, it was everyone. Now, the last one was S, and that's strategic. Now, to get it into alignment with a strategic direction. So, universities, they do research, they want operational, so it runs effectively and do teaching. So one of the things I did was I thought to myself, well, what am I good at? Well, research. So how can my research feed into the university? Like teaching, well, I haven't really done much research on teaching, but operational, well, I thought, well, reasonable accommodation, quite frankly, is an area where everyone, or adjustments we call it, is an area where we really do need some work. And I was interested in trying to develop this. So I decided that I wrote a report for the university, which they adopted almost wholesale after the latest iteration. And in that, they included a research group. So research in clause 4.6, saying that the university will support disability inclusive research that helps the university operationally, essentially. And I thought, okay, that's nice. So I figured that'd be good until I asked for money. Then when I asked for money, I got a little bit of money, which was all I needed, because what I did was I researched on disability travel. Now, who's travelled with a disability? If you're in a wheelchair, where's my wheelchair when you go off the plane, get hurt getting on the plane, get your chair broken, or if you're blind, you want to use a bus, because the bus is like $5, a taxi's $50. But of course, hard to use the bus when you get off the bus, left or right. So a lot of these expenses, and it was quite, well, they were quite high. And so I thought, well, is it just me or is it others? And so I did this research at UQ, got funded, and flew up the Disability Human Rights Commissioner from Sydney, and the Pro Vice Chancellor came across because the Human Rights Commissioner was there. And so we did this research and we wrote a little report, and then we started drafting it for some academic works, which one's accepted, one's we're resubmitting another one. In the meantime, the university got interested, and then they decided to put money where their mouth was, and they developed the Disability Travel Fund, and they put $50,000 on the table, which, Australian dollars, I think we're about 70 cents. $1 Australian buys about 70 cents US. So a reasonable amount of money. And I was really excited. And that came out earlier this year, and then COVID came along, and no one travels. But it's still a win, even though no one's traveling. But the real win has been that it's opened up new opportunities. And some of these opportunities is that the university's seen the value in disability research and how it can actually contribute. And I've got working now with the Pro Vice Chancellor Research on an initiative that will hopefully bring in disability person organisations and NGOs to work in the university, not just in my area, but engineering. Like I'm on in my introduction, I'm on Help Enterprises, which is a very large disability person organisation. We have factories that have people that are deaf working in them. We've got warehouses, horse riding school, physiotherapy, a large employment arm with about 40 officers. Supported accommodation and supported employment. So we've got people in the army and things. And so I guess, and all these so many areas you could think of across the university could be interested. So that's a really cool initiative, which looks like I'm meeting next week about that. We'll finalise it. We've got and that will go up, and that's just one of the examples. And then the other thing is I'm feeling very positive about where we're going at the university. I think all of this showing how useful disability, it's not just it's nice to be inclusive, which it is, but universities are about making money, and so supporting disability research and supporting people with disabilities now is bringing in money into the university, and that's a big factor, I think. And obviously there's a number of us now who are more visible in achieving good things and publishing more than people without disabilities, which I think is just one of those things. But we are, and then just recently I've been appointed to the subcommittee of Senate, the Diversity Inclusion, the Senate Committee for Diversity and Inclusion, which was really cool because we had senators and things, and now the Vice Chancellor's joined that group. So now we have the President and Vice Chancellor of the University and the Provost on this group. And I directly hearing, so, is disability heard? Well, at the moment it's heard by the Vice Chancellor, and she's meeting up with me in a few weeks because there's another thing going on. And I was just appointed an ambassador by the Australian Human Rights Commissioner to work on disability employment. I don't actually know the correct title yet because that only happened day before yesterday. But that's all the exciting things, and I'm very positive of where we're going. I think we've come a long way, and I think initiatives like this, where now we could talk internationally about these issues and share, and hopefully learn from each other in new ways. I think it's exciting. I think the future holds a lot of brightness for us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Paul Harpur, for your experiential sharing. Our next speaker is Professor Dr. Shirish Deshpande. Dr. Shirish Deshpande, sir, please take over. Deshpande, sir, you are not audible.
Yeah,
Yes,
can you
sir,
hear me
now
now?
Yes, sir, you are now audible.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. First of all, at the outset, let me congratulate Sanjay and Rahul for this historic event. And I'm really privileged to be associated with a galaxy of scholars for the first time in my life, I would say, dealing with, coming from the field of disability. Of course, the structured kind of response which I would give with regard to the things the organizers want me to talk about, that certainly I'll do, and then also add something of my own. So first of all, about the teacher-student relationship, which has been the first aspect of comment. I think when I joined in 1982, my postgraduate teaching department, I had encountered, for example, a very small number of students. It was a class of 30 or 40. That is the first point. The second point is all of them were at least a year old. They were not young, immature people who would like to venture something, some pranks against the teacher So they were not of that time. Therefore, and even before I joined as a teacher, as a student, I was quite popular student because I used to explain some of the series of law to the other students. So that itself was a reason for others to develop confidence in my ability to articulate the subject in a very authentic manner. So I never faced any difficulties so far as generation of confidence with the students is concerned, for the simple reason that these size was small and the students were mature ones. And only challenge which I faced when I went to teach in Nalsar University of Law, Hyderabad. At that point of time, I was teaching not the postgraduate students, but I was teaching the LLB students. So they were in their 20s and they were quite young and they were quite willing to take chances. As Professor Anna Lawson mentioned, that she had a problem in dealing with the students. I also faced the problem in Nalsar University because the students used to, play games and talk with each other, and there was no silence which every teacher would expect the classroom to have. So one day I told them very quietly, I said, the Supreme Court of India has recognized that right to life includes right to means of livelihood. I said, do you know what kinds of questions are asked to a teacher with a person who is seeking a job in teaching line? The questions which the administrators ask are, for example, how are you going to control the class? How are you going to study? How are you going to evaluate papers? These are the kinds of questions they are being asked. So I told them, I said, if you persist with this behavior with a teacher with disability, take advantage of their visual disability, obviously it would mean the end of right to means of livelihood for all teachers with disability. They will never be able to make it to the classroom at all. And that was such a serious, that made such a serious impact upon the students that that very batch then transcribed the Professor Rawls' book on political liberalism into a soft copy, and they presented me when I left Nalsar after 2 years. So that was one experience which I had in teaching difficulty, which I had in with the students. They were quite young people, but thereafter those who had practiced those pranks, they came and apologized to me also. That was another important aspect which I would like to emphasize. So quite apart from these, Professor Lawson also mentioned about inaccessibility of books. I'm talking about 1980. Professor Lawson was talking about. So at that point of time, the books were certainly not there, and therefore you have to rely on the human readers. So you have to organize a team of human readers, and then I was teaching American constitutional law and British constitutional law at the postgraduate level, so that demanded a good deal of reading of the judgments of the American Supreme Court and then the House of Lords, and also some of the professors of constitutional law. So that was a big challenge for me, and I had to rely on a team of readers who used to record the work for me, and then I used to take down notes in Braille, and that is how I managed teaching. The life become quite easier when Sanjay Jain joined my classes in 1990s, and it was thereafter I started having additional help, because Sanjay Jain had the great ability to organize people and get the necessary help from them. And he had managed to record books on Canadian constitutional law and American constitutional law and all that. So that made my life quite easy. So I would say my greatest achievement in my life is that I am a teacher of Sanjay Jain, I would say. So what I wanted to say was that inaccessibility of books was the biggest issue I had to face, and that of course might have led to the kind of limitations of development of the law in-depth studies in law depth at that particular point of time. Of course, it is now being compensated by the enormous amount of books which are now made available in soft copy, and there is now hardly any time for us to read the books because of our commitments to teaching and research as well. So quite apart from these personal aspects, I believe that the UNCRPD has really revolutionized the philosophy of persons with disability, looking at the life realities or lived realities of persons with disability. One of the most important aspects of UNCRPD is that it recognizes persons with disability as a form of human diversity and part of humanity. I think this is the most significant aspect of it. The second aspect is that it also recognizes that persons with disability are entitled to all the human rights and fundamental freedoms on the basis of equality with others. So I believe this is the otherhood dimension of the UNCRPD, but the goal is to achieve brotherhood. So that journey is has to begin from otherhood to brotherhood. That is the idea underlying the UNCRPD. Most importantly, I thought that recognition of the person with disability as a form of human diversity has far-reaching implications. For example, when you talk about diversity, it depends upon two important factors, as I would say, borrow the insights of Professor Rawls. He says that a social basis of self-respect is one important aspect of being treated as equal. And secondly, although you are unique and different, secondly important thing is, he says that you have to have the lively sense of one's own worth. I think these two elements are important aspects of the human diversity, and I believe that the recognition of disability as a human diversity is an important fact, in the sense that it has the convention invests the fact of disability with the potential of being the actual marker of disability identity, thereby, according to the persons with disability group, for example, that equal emotive dignity in the formation of identities as well, along with or on the basis of equality with other political groups. So I believe that we need to work on this particular dimension of diversity, and for that purpose, I thought that we need to develop the doctrine of substantive equality, as Professor Sandra Friedman has mentioned in her IGCN article, and also in her rejoinder to Professor McKinnon's book, response to Professor McKinnon about the nuanced understanding of the doctrine of substantive equality. I think what is needed is to develop the doctrine of substantive equality, and it's a very serious matter. We have to be sensitive to the lived life experiences of persons with disability, of isolation, neglect, subordination, and exploitation. I think these must inform the understanding and application of the equality principle. So, more importantly, I thought that in order to equalize the chances of being accepted as the equal with others, I believe that we need to demonstrate that the political emotions, how political emotions are being treated by the state, that is an important aspect, as has been developed by Professor Martha Nussbaum in her book, Craving Political Emotions and Why Love Matters for Justice. I believe we need to work on this aspect, because the emotional dimension, political aspect of the emotional dimension is important, because it is here we can demonstrate that how hollow and how indifferent the ableist perspective is. And in order to in order to deconstruct the ableist epistemology, I believe that we need to adopt this inquiry, which Professor Martha Nussbaum has asked us to think about. I think that is, I believe, is the academic, as a disability academician, I would like all of us to think about. I think it is necessary that we need to focus upon the aspect of social consciousness, as Sanjay mentioned in his opening remarks, that awareness raising and sensitization are the important aspects which Article 8 talks about, UNCRPD. And I believe that putting it in the chapter on human rights themselves is a very important development, I thought. And we can deconstruct the ableist consciousness, namely, for example, the social prejudices that the disability means inability and incompetence. I believe that we have to deconstruct this social consciousness and demonstrate that persons with disability have the ability and competence to work like any others. And that is the only way in which we can overcome the attitudinal barriers which have been constructed on the basis of the ableist epistemology. So I believe that is all I think we need to do as a practical matter. That is the very challenging task. We have to develop a nuanced understanding of this doctrine of substantive equality, informed by the life experiences of the persons with disability. I think that is what is absolutely essential. And I think that so far as technology is concerned, it has been quite helpful in overcoming the challenges of inaccessibility. Of course, we have a long way to go to establish equal human rights and fundamental freedom with others. But I believe we have started on the right process. So once again, I thank all of you. I thank all the professors who have contributed to this important event, historic event. And thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Deshpande. May I request Dr. Sanjay Jain to take over now?
Well, I don't think I have anything to add after having listened to likes of Professor Stein, Anna Lawson, Peter Blanck, Dr. Deshpande, and Paul Harpur. But I think I will fail in my duty if I don't raise few issues. Already we are running late, so I will try to be as brief as possible, but my speech can be found on the blog. I think this summit has taught me to be very disciplined. So I think very rarely it has happened that my speech has gone to the blog before even I have spoken. But anyway, let me ask this question. When I heard Dr. Deshpande or Anna, we have problems in class. Okay, disabled teachers have problems in class. But which teachers do not have problem in class? But the non-disabled teachers do not have problems in class. So why we have to be overly ableist in claiming that only we have to be extra cautious in avoiding the problems in the class, right? So I personally believe that our problems are unduly highlighted when we face problems in the classroom. Those problems are unduly and disproportionately highlighted in comparison with problems faced by the so-called other teachers. So I think that has to be taken care of. Let's accept that students are students and teachers are teachers. Even as a student, I was also naughty, right? That is the first response I want to have to the so-called problems in the class of the disabled teachers. My second point which I want to make is about public law. Therefore, it is important to deconstruct public law. As a disability academician, I always make it a point to deconstruct a public law. Just to give one example, one of the provisions under Indian Constitution says that if a a judge of a high court or Supreme Court can be removed on the ground of physical incapacity. I have to ask myself, should I go run off mill and explain to my students, okay, if somebody becomes disabled, then he has to be removed? Is it not a run off mill critique of law? Should I become more structured in my critique, and should I tell my students that this is medical model of disability? You are trying to locate disability of a person in his body rather than locating it in social structures, discriminatory structures of the society. So I personally believe that as a disability academician, our job is to abandon this, the so-called run-off mill critique of law, and take a more nuanced approach and engage with law on terms which are emancipatory to the existence of the disabled, right? So I've done a paper, for example, critiquing the constitutionalism around the world, critiquing the origins of the constitutions of several countries. For example, I have problematized the notion of unsound mind. I mean, what do you mean by unsound mind? Why the notion of unsound mind still perpetuate and be endured by the constitutions around the world? Friends, I'm more interested to hear Sandra Friedman and she engaging with the galaxy of scholars. I'm too junior to take the time of the audience. So therefore, I would stop here, but I would request all of you to please read my speech on the blog. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for keeping the time. We are really running short of time. May I request Professor Sandra Friedman to take over?
Well, thank you so much to everybody. I hope you can hear me. I think we have been treated to an extraordinary panel, and especially to hear the personal reflections combined with the academic insights and the way in which the personal, the academic, and the political intertwine. So what I would like to do is create a conversation between our panelists about some of the pressing issues that have arisen. And the first one, which Professor Blanck touched on but didn't really develop, was where we are now with COVID-19. Obviously, this has been one of the biggest global crises faced, at least in the 21st century globally. And what I would like to know from the panelists is this, are there opportunities, or are there, and what are there, and are there detriments, and what are they? We know that everybody is equally exposed to the COVID-19. Everybody is equally needing to take precautions, but it's also exposed some of the deepest inequalities in our societies, in all of our countries, and more globally. But at the same time, would you say, and I wonder from Professor Blanck, who mentioned your study, and you said we're at a watershed moment, I think you used the words, but didn't expand on that, you tantalizing said. Professor Deshpande, you talked about the great consciousness of ableist barriers, and I wonder whether now that there is such a widespread facing of disabling barriers by everyone, by so many people in society, whether you think that progress has been made towards recognizing these disabling barriers and to the universality of all of our position, or you think, perhaps, this has exacerbated inequalities, and particularly for people, academics with disabilities, lawyers with disabilities. There will be an absence of resources, fewer jobs, fewer possibilities going forward. So I wonder, Professor Blanck and Professor Deshpande, as a start, perhaps you could give your thoughts about this issue of COVID opportunities and detriments going forward, as a kind of conversation between you. Professor Pete, I think you're still muted. Yeah, that's better.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for that kind introduction. Maybe I can start with some pre-COVID numbers, if that's all right. For quite a large survey of lawyers, by far, pre-COVID, the highest prevalence of disability was mental health disabilities. 31% of the lawyers had some form of, reported some form of mental health disability, as compared to 9% who were deaf and 4% who were blind, and in between, mobility impairments. With regard to accommodation pre-COVID, it was not usual that people would, quote, telework, 15%, 16%. Flex time was the biggest accommodation, and as Anna Lawson said and others, 8% had issues with mobility and technology. In terms of discrimination, highest proportion of reported discrimination was by intersectional categories of women, LGB who have disabilities, women, ethnic minorities, racial minorities, African American in particular, LGB and disability. Now, what's the relevance of that? And then I'll stop because I want others to, of course, comment. This is pre-COVID, and we have what might be considered a mental health epidemic in the legal profession. One of 3 lawyers almost mentioned stress, anxiety, depression, substance abuse. What will COVID and post-COVID entail with social isolation, with remote work? Will organizations of lawyers and other organizations have different or new conceptions of what diversity and inclusion means in our society, given that there may be this increased social distance? In fact, many CEOs say they're going to continue the remote work policies, and universities as well, for large segments of their individuals. So I will close with your excellent question and defer to the other panelists. What will post and during COVID hold in terms of social and personal inclusion for individuals who are highly subjected to discrimination and who very often, as I said earlier, are not receiving the types of accommodations they've requested? I'll stop there. Now you're muted.
Yeah, of course, so far as India is concerned, I believe that the policy of social distancing has resulted in total lack of application of mind so far as persons with visual disabilities are concerned. We are very much concerned about the fact that even if you want to go for buying essential commodities, which were open during this COVID times, you find that persons with disability would not get the necessary help which is needed for them to go out and have the access to the essential, commodities. So I believe the basic principle that before you formulate any policy with regard to COVID-19, the persons with disability should have been consulted. Another important aspect which has happened so far as COVID-19 is concerned is with regard to the fact that there are persons with visual disability who are working as attendants in hospitals, for example, where corona patients were there. And therefore, we had requested the government to grant exemptions from the attendance for the job, but it came very late in the process. Of course, during that period, a number of persons with visual disability have suffered from corona because of this, access being, because of the access to these COVID-affected patients. So I believe that so far as COVID-19 is concerned, there has no serious effort being made with regard to the kinds of implications which such policies have with regard to persons with disability, and in particular persons with visual disability. So I believe that we need to be more assertive in terms of the kinds of accommodations which are needed, because I would look at the exemption from daily attendance in offices, for example, and if it is possible for you to work from home, as we have been doing as teachers from home, we have been engaging classes. So there may be certain kinds of jobs which you cannot perform from work from home. So I believe in such cases, you need to be sensitive to the differences and the kind of consequences which might be produced by insisting on applying the same rule to all persons with disability. Thank you.
May I say in our studies that the individuals with disabilities lacked no assertiveness. The organizational culture did not respond. That was the real challenge.
That's right, I agree with you. Same is the case here also.
Thank you. I wonder if any of our other panelists want to come in on this point. Does anyone sense opportunities coming out of the COVID in terms of a greater awareness of the safety barriers, or bleak?
Well,
May I come in?
there is a current. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry.
No, please continue. Peter, please continue. Michael, please continue.
No,
Then
I was just going to say, our group has just put out a paper called "The Silver Linings from COVID." Obviously, there's not many, but the transition to remote work and technology-driven personal dynamics, we believe, might greatly change attitudes, we hope, about technology accommodations.
You said it. Same thing I wanted to say. The new normal of pandemic has really brought this transformation. Since not very long ago, if a person with disability asks for work from home, the eyebrows would be raised. But now work from home is a norm. Thank you.
Michael, I think you wanted to come in on this as well, did you?
No, Peter covered it quite well. I would just cover the negative side of it, which is to remember that in some parts of the world, people with disabilities are having trouble accessing the internet and ITC. And so, when I do my lectures out of Pretoria or out of Western Cape, many of the students, have difficulty getting online, or if they are online, they keep their visuals off so as to preserve bandwidth. And we need to think about them. But there is certainly a difficult time for employers to argue at the moment that you need to be physically present. But at the same time, we also need to be mindful of social inclusion. And while it's always good to be empowered for your employment, it's also good to be physically present and interacting with your peers.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the panel for these insights. And I'm sure this is going to be an ongoing conversation going forward. I want to move on to a slightly different point, which is all of our esteemed panelists are experts and at the forefront of developing disability studies. And I was wondering whether we could talk a little bit more about whether this puts an inordinate responsibility on lawyers with disabilities to be at the forefront of developing disability studies, or the opposite. And I'm talking from the experience of feminism and gender, where on the one hand, it was very important to have women at the forefront of gender studies and women taking these issues forward. But on the other hand, there was a risk of it becoming ghettoized. It could well be marginalized just by the very fact that it had always been devalued. So I wonder what your experience is. I was very struck by Michael, Professor Stein, you mentioned at the beginning that you see very few lawyers with disabilities in commercial law conferences. Anna Lawson, you mentioned, on the other hand, that you're very glad to move from teaching property law to teaching disability studies and equality. So again, is there a risk that this is a big responsibility on lawyers with disabilities? Is it crucial that this is where the voices are heard? And on the other hand, should we be moving, as again with the experience of feminism, should we be moving to mainstreaming? Should we be moving to a situation in which rather than disability being, specialized and on the side as far as academic research is concerned. It should be mainstreamed in the way that Sanjay Jain mentioned at the end. Constitutional public law textbooks should be incorporating disability insights, for example, into everything. So I wonder, Michael, Professor Stein, whether you want to start on this issue.
Oh, my pleasure. It is a privilege and a pleasure to be able to teach in disability law and to try to create an environment that's inclusive and that includes perspectives of advocates and others. So I don't see it as a responsibility. I see it as a privilege. I do think we have authenticity in the way that that word is used, in a way that other group members have authenticity to have insights and represent their views. But it's a large tent, and pulling in others who are outside that group, I think, only makes the subject matter stronger. Sanjay's point is very well taken, though. And, one thing that I try to do is I cross-teach. And so, besides teaching at the law school, the medical school, the Kennedy School of Government, the ed school, and the extension school, I also go to colleagues' classes. And I will lecture at the School of Public Health when someone's teaching mental health. I will lecture on child security when they're teaching that. And I will lecture in the human rights courses of my friends and just offer to do that as a way of ensuring that disability is being mainstream. But then, as Sanjay points out, there are entire areas where things are missing. So, I just wrote the first article on business and human rights and disability. There is 0 published on it. It went out to peer review, and the 2 first peer review publications rejected it on the grounds that I didn't reference the literature when there is no literature. And I got frustrated with it, and so my friend Ilyas and I are doing the Cambridge Companion to Business and Human Rights coming out this spring. And I'm doing it for the sole purpose of being able to have a chapter in it on disability, which is the flea wagging the tail, wagging the dog. So we need to do it on both fronts. Both fronts.
Can you hear me? I'm not sure whether I'm on mute or unmute at the moment.
Can hear you.
We can hear you, Anna.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
We can't see you.
No, sorry, I've lost my screen on my phone, so I'm finding it difficult to adjust its settings.
That's all right, we can hear you.
Okay. Yes, I agree with Michael and the points that have been made completely, and I think there is a danger of ghettoisation, and it is part of the responsibility of all of us, I think, who are working in disability law areas, including non-disabled people, is to widen the reach of the subject, to draw more people into it, whether they're disabled or not. But I think it's also really important that whoever does come into it does retain a level of respect and concern about the voice of disabled people, which is at the heart of disability studies. And the other thing I think I wanted to say on this is that within disability law, certainly in the UK, there's been a tendency for quite a lot of fragmentation. So there's a group of people who come in from a background in mental health, but tend not to go out of that to other parts of disability law. And similarly with social care or equality, and just having those conversations across the internal legal disciplines is really important as well.
If I could just pile on what you said about including people with disability, I think is really important when you're, particularly when we're talking about disability, having people with disability having a voice. Today I was chairing a panel where we're talking about disability action plans and strategic approaches, and I pointed out that there was 2 people on the in this group that had disabilities, both of who were blind, and obviously blind people are wonderful people, but it doesn't represent the whole disability community. There was no one in a wheelchair. There was no one with, this, and that wasn't representative. And also the other thing is, I asked, how would it go down if we had a a panel of white men talking about women's pregnancy issues in the workplace. It just wouldn't fly. It would be seen as unacceptable. Why should it be acceptable to have people in organisations or in the community talking about people with disability, but not having people with disability not just on it, but leading that group?
So yes, and I was wondering then...
may I come in for a brief comment?
Yes, I was going to ask you, Sanjay, whether you could comment on how we actually get to where you want to be. How do we get to having disability studies more mainstream in the way you're suggesting?
Yeah, I believe, I agree with Anna that first of all, we have to avoid fragmentation. And secondly, we have, in order to dispense with ghettoization, we need to include more so-called non-disabled scholars into disability law. Of course, that does not mean that teaching disability law is a burden. I entirely agree with Michael that teaching disability law is a pleasure. In fact, more you go into disability law, more tolerant, more open, more accommodative you become even in your thinking, right? And most importantly, why we look at disability in terms of binary? Why, for example, we look at disabled and non-disabled as a binary? Why can't we accept the simple fact that disability is an evolving concept and anybody can become disabled? So disability is something which is around the corner and can strike anybody anytime. So I think disability law basically is a domain which would make us plastic in our thinking, which would make us elastic in our imagination, which would make us more meditating in our introspection, and therefore to confine it to disabled. And therefore I sometimes feel very disappointed. Most of the times people ask me to, I mean, particularly from outside, most of the time I get invitation to speak on disability law as if I'm not good enough in other public law or contract law or property law, etc., etc. So I think to provide right place to disability legal studies, the word coined by Professor Sajid Moore, I think it is important that more and more so-called non-disabled people start taking interest in it, and not to empathize with people with disability probably, but to probably make themselves more inclusive, make themselves more accommodative, make themselves more tolerant.
Can I just make one point, small point?
Yes, yes, please do.
Yeah. See, I am also working with National Federation of the Blind since last 21 years. So what, lawyers start with an advantage because it's an art of persuasion. So they have the ability to pinpointly point out what are the problems and also give nuanced focus upon the problems which are being faced, and also come out with diversity sensitive kind of solutions. So definitely lawyers start with an advantage so far as the professional art of persuasion is concerned. And in that sense, advocacy dimension of the disability sector can be taken, can be certainly led by lawyers. But I think important contribution can be made by recognizing the plurality within the disability sector itself. For example, not only within the say visually challenged individuals, you have a wide variety of people with different degrees of disability, different degrees of accessibility problems, quite apart from the interdisability dimensions of pluralism in disability itself. I think what we had as a National Federation, we tried to have a common disability forum, but unfortunately each one has its own identity, and therefore they were not willing to come together and form a common disability forum. But I believe, I take the point that there should not be alienation of the others, and therefore lawyers have to be careful in seeking the inputs from the cross sections of disability, and also the plurality of interests which they are supposed to represent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that really leads on to my next question, which is, you talked about the challenges of alliances within the disability movement. And I wonder whether you could talk a little bit more about alliances between the disability movement and other groups. Obviously, there are intersectional issues, but with that in the picture, alliances with women, with LGBTQI people, with in relation to race. You talk, Peter, very interestingly that your study included both, and you looked at LGBT. I think you looked at LGBT women and people with disabilities. I wasn't sure if you were looking at the intersection of that.
We were.
Anna, you talked about that there was an increasing focus on race and obviously the decolonization curriculum, which is happening in law schools here. So I wondered whether these are now turning into somewhat, whether there are conflictual issues who can get the most attention, or whether these are solidarity issues where alliances can be formed, and where does intersectionality come into all of that? So Peter, yes, did you want to come in first?
Oh, well, I didn't want to interrupt Anna, but yes, we looked at disability and sexual orientation and gender identity, particularly because there are aspects of disclosure that are required often, and they are among the least studied, the least voice present in the legal profession in terms of moving forward in terms of diversity and inclusion. I will stop there, but say that for those of us who are very focused on the mental health community, that represents large numbers of both law students and lawyers. And I'd be interested to hear others' comments about the nature of that particular condition, which of course cuts across all types of intersectionality as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna, you
Yes.
welcome this.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, really interesting question, and I think very timely. And I think it's really important that we do use it as an opportunity, every opportunity to promote solidarity rather than conflict between groups that are pushing for very similar types of inclusion and equality. And I think there are specific organisations that focus on intersectional issues. Like there's some excellent organisations that focus on disability and gender. But I was really struck by something I heard from the chair of Stonewall a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying, which is an LGBT organisation, and he was basically saying that everything they do takes an intersectional approach. So whenever they're doing research on LGBT issues, they'll make sure that they include a disability and a race and a broader gender dimension and a religion dimension, because that actually enriches the data. And I think that's a really good type of thing to think about. So when there are decisions that have to be made about prioritization, like in terms of scholarships, who's going to get scholarships, or that kind of thing, just ensuring that an intersectional dimension is embedded within any priority that's made. And I think learning from each other is really, really important. The disability law has so much to learn from gender law. And I think at the moment we have so much to learn from the decolonization approach that's been associated with Black Lives Matter and movements like that. And so much applies to the disability context as it does to other marginalised groups too. And I think working together across those divides is really important.
Sanjay, you've worked on, I think, gender and the law as well. And
yeah,
perhaps you could come in on this one too.
It's a shame that I have not done much on. I have not done much on disability vis-a-vis intersectionality. But of late, I've started thinking in terms of intersection of disability with other social issues. And particularly, I will be very much interested to join alliance with, for example, Dalits or LGBTQ in India. because as Anna very rightly said, we have a lot to learn from these moments. And I think these moments are far more matured and far more stronger, and probably they have far more greater aura around them. And therefore, we have to probably, as a group, we have to solidify ourselves. We have to, rather than trying to be in conflict with them, rather than in trying to be in antagonistic relationship with them. I think it would be very interesting if we join hands with them, join alliance with them. I think that may be one of the projects, which may be one of the inputs, so far as I'm concerned, of this summit.
Thank you. I think we're probably running out of time. But so how I'd like to end is perhaps each of the panelists could give us one sentence or perhaps two sentences on what do you think is the most important issue for legal academics and lawyers in relation to disability. What do you think is the most important issue going forward that we should prioritize? I know that's a difficult one because there are many, but perhaps just choose one that you can mention in 2 sentences by way of ending this part of the discussion. Would you like to start, Peter? Just because you're on the top right-hand corner of my screen.
Oh, well, what an excellent question. And I have to start when children are young in the educational system. There is no meaningful pipeline into the legal academy or law schools of people with disabilities, and that's reflected in the number of individuals who disclose disabilities and go into the legal profession or academics. That's 5 sentences.
Thank you so much. Paul.
Yeah, related to that is when we get into the position that, for example, Peter found that the wealthy partner gets the accommodation, but the junior lawyer doesn't. Well, I think as a legal academic becoming a bit more senior, I get opportunities where they're prepared to make accommodations or adjustments for me because I am where I am. The same. So I think it's good for me to then say, well, no, don't just fix it for me. Let's put this into a situation or policy so it fixes it for everyone, and then I can benefit from the policy that applies to everyone. Because we're in a situation where we can get that. We're more likely to get that change made than the person behind us who can't advocate for themselves or make the policy shift. Which was more than one.
Thank you, Paul. Michael, would you go next?
Sure. I think in 2020, between the pandemic and between the divisive right-wing neoclassical politics that are dominating much of the planet, we need to think about we societies rather than me societies and work towards solidarity and unity and see our commonality and our mutual interest and respect on how to create better societies, and that includes disability, since it's a cross-cutting issue.
Thank you. We societies rather than me societies. What are your thoughts, Anna?
Gosh, it's hard to follow that one. I think for me, it's embedding disability critique in mainstream law teaching, and that may need initially to come from people who have some specific expertise in disability issues, or a collaboration like Michael's been doing, where he goes in to teach on other people's courses, but embedding it into the teaching and also embedding it into textbooks.
Thank you, Anna. Shirish Deshpande, what are your thoughts on this?
Deshpande sir, you have to unmute yourself.
Sandra, till sir comes, should I come in?
Yes, please. While we're waiting for.
Yeah. My thoughts are. I cannot but agree with Anna. I cannot agree, but agree more with Anna. But I want to emphasize on visibility. Visibility of disability academician in mainstream conferences. For example, I have attended all ICONS conferences. I especially went to South Africa to critique Professor Boaventura de Santos, and I told him how his Southern epistemology, although it is transformative, it is completely ableist. And to my surprise and to my great satisfaction, he conceded that yes, even if his Southern epistemology is transformative, it is ableist. So I think if you maintain your visibility and if you are upfront and cohesive in your thoughts, as a disabled scholar, you can make a lot of difference to mainstream legal scholarship.
Can you hear
Thank
me
you
now?
very much.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Shirish, we can hear you now.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you
yes,
so
we
much.
can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, what I suggest is that so far as cross-disability forums are concerned, I believe that so far as demands of rights are concerned, there can be uniformity of demands of rights, what kinds of rights you are demanding, but there may be diversity of remedial responses. So I believe the truth lies in this fact that, okay, we may show solidarity in demanding rights, but the remedial responses are bound to be different. Then that should not result in conflict of interest at all. So even when, for example, we talk about women with disability and the gender movement, I think we have to take into account the intersectionality dimension so far as women with disability as well are concerned. I think there will not be any incompatibility as such, I believe. Thank you.
Well, thank you to everybody for really a really wonderful panel, for sharing your insights, your experience, your expertise, and also for this great conversation that we've had now. I think it's been a wonderful panel and one which will really be very memorable. So should I hand over to you, Swati, to do the questions? Because I'm not at all sure where we are with time.
And thank you to our moderator.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Professor Friedman.
Well, I'm off
More than
to
a pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra ma'am.
Ma'am, Swati madam, we should take at least 2-3 questions to be fair to audience.
Yes, sir.
If
Yes,
at
sir.
all there
Oh.
are.
So I have 2 questions here on the chat. I'll just read it for you. We have a question from DK Chopra. And actually, it's not one question, it's 2 questions. The first question is there any difference between quality of teaching between one suffering disability and one non? Is there reservation and relaxation in academic qualification for teachers suffering disability outside India?
Michael, can you take that? Outside India, are there quotas for disabled teachers?
There are no quotas, and to my knowledge, there's no affirmative action or finger on the scale, although since 2000, many U.S. law schools will include disability as one of their diversity characteristics. And as far as lower workloads or anything else, I think it's quite the opposite. Many of us are feeling much like, at least my generation, feel like the generation of women and people of color ahead of us, that we have to be over the top productive as opposed to anything else. But maybe that's my own neurosis.
No, I don't think it is. We did our university survey for the first time, including disability. Our university is quite old, so I think it's very surprising that we've gone through how many 50 of them and never included disability. Now we have, and the numbers of people with disability aren't very high. But there was a large group of people that refused to admit whether they had or did or did not have a disability, which is suspect they had disabilities.
And I think just responding to the first point there, I think disabled people can be just as good teachers as non-disabled people, sometimes better. because you're being creative very often all the time and making people think in ways they may not have thought before. But we do need accessibility, and we do need support around systems that are not usable by us for one reason or another.
Right. Yes. Thank you for those answers. The same question, same person has second question. Is there any study of behavioral change to deterrence of student, like doubting if students do mischief? For example, a blind teacher may doubt students are running from the classes. So I think we need to reframe the question. Yes, sir.
Yeah. How to ensure that both teachers and students they remain cordial to one another. For example, neither teachers must doubt too much about students, nor students must doubt too much about teachers. If I've understood the question, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yes,
would you like to respond? Maybe Peter would like to take that.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yeah.
Go ahead, Anna.
Me? What did you say? Yeah, so I think this is where being open and respectful to each other really matters. And in a university, really, although they may be 18, you're not dealing with, very young children. They are essentially adults. And I've certainly found that if you explain to them what you're, how you're working. So my tactic, for instance, when there's quite a lot of whispering or noise in the room, is to remind them that I can't read quickly enough to read out all my notes. So I'm having to remember what I've got to say. And if they make a lot of noise, I'm going to get distracted and not be able to continue the lecture. And then they usually go incredibly quiet. So I think it's important to be open about what you need them to do in order to support them to get the learning they need. And I've certainly never found, once I've been open with them, I've never found any question of doubt, really.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to briefly come in, I become sometimes ableist. When I feel troubled in the class, I say, okay, friends, I want to see through your eyes, right? And then the atmosphere is transformed, and students are extremely friendly.
Yes. So the same person has the third question: how address persons suffering temporary or transactional disability whose needs are same as disabled? Jen, sir?
Okay. Peter, can you please come in and help us? Transitional and temporary disabilities, how to address?
Well, I can at least give a American-centric perspective, and that is we've revised our Americans with Disabilities Act to include both temporary, potentially, and episodic and non-episodic disabilities. So there's a greater awareness of temporary impairments, particularly in the area, for example, of mental disability. Others might have a different sense from an international perspective, Michael Stein or others.
Well, just that we treat all students as individuals, and hopefully humanely, and in tandem with them. And everyone has a need for an accommodation, whether it's disability, temporary disability, parenting, family needs, especially now in COVID. And we just try to accommodate and act humanely and in an inclusive manner for all our students and for others.
Practically, I think temporary person who's got a broken leg, in the workplace, for example, they've got a temporary injury, they're going to be rehabilitated back into the workplace. So the law is, the whole structure is that this person has a temporary injury and they'll be back. If it's going to be permanent, it would be a different situation. But and particularly of how strongly they're going to advocate a person who's who has a broken arm doesn't have years of oppression or experiencing knockbacks. They've got this broken arm. Why the hell can't you have the door open for me when I get there? They're not going to be as easily quietened. And so in a way, I think that could be, it is something useful to build upon, that a change can be made by someone who shouts very loudly.
Yes. Yes, Professor Anna.
Yeah. I think maybe a linked issue, it's slightly separate, but a linked issue is when somebody has employment and acquires some kind of illness or the beginning of an impairment that's likely to be long-term. At the moment, a lot of countries around the world have very poor records on retaining those staff. They tend to disappear from the workforce. Mm-hmm. So I think a flexible approach to periods of disability leave, which will allow people to maybe acquire new skills or learn new ways of doing things, or just get time to adapt is really, really important.
Right. Yes. Thanks a lot for that answer. Next question we have from Jasmine Khosla, and her question is specifically addressed to Professor Peter Blanck. She says, how has the situation and circumstances regarding the disabled people being subject to discrimination evolved over time, and what changes should be made to make things better for them? Professor Peter.
Yes, it's a very good question. In addition to studying reports of discrimination, we have a ton of data, which I didn't talk about, on ways that people believe that discrimination can be mitigated in their firms and which have been mitigated in their experience. And obviously among the top are close, meaningful mentoring relationships, as well as meaningful affinity groups. Unfortunately, in the United States, at least in the legal profession, there is a lot of money spent by large and medium-sized law firms on topics of diversity and inclusion. But as I said, very little movement towards the needle. That is why also we are very excited that our studies will be longitudinal in nature, which means because of our privacy algorithms, we can do it properly. We will not only be tracking people voluntarily in accord with our human subjects provisions over time, but also cross-sectionally as a cohort. So we will look at pre and post issues, COVID, job transition, and so forth. So we hope that will provide additional information.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm sure all of us would be looking forward to the research findings, Professor Blanck. We have next question from Luz Paula Yori, and Luz says that she herself is a person with psychosocial disability and she aspires to be part of academia. So her question is, how can we include people with disabilities, especially psychosocial disabilities, in the academia?
This again is a very important question, as I tried to suggest earlier. One of my closest colleagues and friends is a woman named Ellen Sachs, who's a MacArthur Genius Fellow, who is a very distinguished professor of law at the University of Southern California, and who also is a woman with schizophrenia. And she writes very poignantly about her experiences in a best-selling book called The Center Cannot Hold, which I would reference to you, about her challenges and opportunities as a woman with severe psychosocial disability engaged in the legal profession and in law school.
Right, yes. Thank you, Professor Blanck, for those sharing of that example and answering the question. Jan sir, we are done with the questions.
Okay. Can we ask Rahul to quickly have a last word, very quickly, maybe 2 minutes, and then we'll proceed to formal vote of thanks.
Yes, Rahul, please take over.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks everyone. I have been listening with rapt attention to the conversation for the last 2.5.
So Rahul Bajaj has left.
I think Rahul has lost his connection. We'll just wait for a moment. We'll just wait for a moment.
Yes, yes. Hello.
While we are waiting, where is the blog and the information that people might want to refer to?
We have already, Peter, we have blog, we have put all your articles on the blog of the event for all the audience to read. Yeah. We put all the articles.
As well as others as well?
Yeah, yeah. For anybody who wants to read, the blog is accessible. It's open access.
Yes.
Yeah. Swati Madam,
Yes.
maybe you can show the link.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I've just shared it. Professor Blanck, I've shared the link here. You can just check on this link.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I think we'll have to remind Rahul once.
Just a minute, I will remind. Otherwise, we'll proceed with vote of thanks.
Yes, sir.
Just a minute. I think the call has gone. Okay, he has a battery issue, so ma'am, you can proceed with vote of thanks.
Okay, no problem, sir. Yes. So with that, we come towards the end, and I'm indeed privileged to deliver this vote of thanks. So I convey my heartfelt gratitude to Maria Soledad Cisternas for sharing her video message and taking time out for us. Professor Michael Ashley Stein, Professor Peter Blanck, Professor Anna Lawson, Professor Paul Harpur, Dr. Shirish Deshpande, Professor Sandra Friedman for such a wonderful moderation, Ms. Vaijayanti Joshi and Dr. Sanjay Jain for all their support and guidance. I would also convey my heartfelt gratitude to Rahul Bajaj for his valuable contribution to the concept note and of course the prompts that he has created for the resource persons. I thank Bar and Bench for being our publicity partners, Radio Udan for being our media partners. I would fail in my duty if I don't thank my colleagues, Varsha Khandagle, Aparna Tatke, Ashish Pawar, Swati Kulkarni, Rohit Bokel, Madhukar Togam, Yogesh Mistry, student Atharva Dive for his contribution in video, and most importantly, all of you for being such a participative audience. Thanks a lot, and hope to see you tomorrow again for the day 2 session. Thank you all and have a nice day ahead.
Yeah, tomorrow's session is dedicated to lawyers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I want all of you in same numbers to attend the session. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Hi guys.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Harpur.
Thank you.